In 1986, two pits in the Sichuan Basin of southwest China gave up a Bronze Age civilization that nobody knew had existed. Out of the ground came bronze heads with hard, angular faces, masks a meter and more across, their eyes projecting from the sockets in blunt cylinders. A standing figure of a man, 1.72 meters of bronze on a 90-centimeter pedestal, 2.62 meters in all. Trees of bronze, the tallest 3.96 meters high, hung with birds and fruit. Sheets of beaten gold, the tusks of dozens of elephants. Thousands of objects, most of them deliberately smashed, many of them burnt, packed down into the earth. The culture that made them left not one line of writing, and not one mention in the 4,000 years of China's written history. It is called Sanxingdui, after the low mounds beside it, and it is among the strangest things ever lifted out of the ground. Begin with the craft, because that is what first stops the eye. These are not crude castings. The walls of the great masks thin in places to about 2 millimeters of bronze. The figures were built up in sections, cast separately and joined, with parts welded together, a command of the metal as sure as anything achieved anywhere in the ancient world. The standing figure is the largest bronze human statue to survive from its time anywhere in the world. The trees are feats of casting that modern foundries would not undertake lightly. Whoever worked here was not learning the craft. They had mastered it. The masks and heads are only the beginning of it. There are trees of bronze, the tallest of them 3.96 meters. It's 3 tiers of branches carrying 9 birds and hung with fruit. A dragon running down one side of the trunk. Sacred trees, almost certainly, reaching from the earth towards the sky. There is a mask of beaten gold, gold foil pressed over bronze faces. A golden staff worked with figures and fish and birds. No other early Chinese site holds anything like this assemblage. It is a whole religion rendered in metal, and a religion no one can now read, and all of it was destroyed on purpose. The bronzes did not go into the pits whole and reverent. They went in broken, heads wrenched from bodies, trees snapped, masks shattered, then scorched in fire, then packed down into the earth among the ivory and the jade. Whatever the rite was, it ended in the deliberate ruin of the most precious things the city possessed. A people does not smash and burn its own gods lightly. Something was being closed off, or warded away, or sent on. The great standing figure gives some sense of what it was all for. He rises on a pedestal of elephant heads, robed and barefoot, his outsized hands curled into rings around something that is no longer there. A tusk, perhaps, or a staff. He is a priest, or a king, or a god, fixed forever in the middle of a rite whose meaning died with the people who performed it. And that is the first puzzle. The story of Chinese bronze, as it is conventionally told, begins far to the north, on the Yellow River, at a town called Earlytou, where the earliest large-scale Chinese bronze casting is dated to roughly 1900 to 1500 BC. Modest pieces, small wine vessels modeled on pottery shapes, the first work of the section mold method. Sanxingdui's pits were buried later, radiocarbon dated to between about 1200 and 1000 BC, and they sit hundreds of kilometers to the southwest, in a basin ringed by mountains. A skeptic will say the South simply inherited the northern technique and ran with it, and in part that is plainly true. The section mold method itself is shared. But inheritance does not account for the gap in ambition. The masks, the trees, the great standing figure have no antecedents at Earlytou or anywhere north of the mountains. They are larger and more complex than the metalwork of the culture they are supposed to descend from, and they appear in a basin where no long local tradition of bronze had been thought to exist. The usual order of things, simple giving way to sophisticated over centuries, does not run cleanly here. And then there is the silence. The walled city at Sanxingdui covered about 3.6 square kilometers. It had agriculture and workshops and trade, and it is named in nothing. No annal records it, no later writer remembers it, no king list places it. It worked metal more skillfully than anyone around it, and then, it seems, it ended. The gods broken and burned and buried in those pits. The population perhaps moving on to a successor city, Jinsha, after some upheaval around 3,000 years ago. At Jinsha, about 40 kilometers away on the edge of what is now Chengdu, some of the same imagery carries on. The same reverence for the sun, the same fine goldwork, as if the people, or at least their gods, had simply moved house. But run the thread the other way, back beyond Sanxingdui, and it disappears into nothing. A civilization that left spectacular art, a great walled city, and no name at all. The art itself only deepens the strangeness, and it is here that the temptation to overread becomes strongest. The masks are unlike anything else in early China. flat, schematic, severe, and in the most famous of them, the eyes thrust outward on stalks, ending in flat discs, a face no human face has ever worn. It is tempting to take these as portraits, and to ask what manner of people had eyes and brows like that. But that is to mistake the work. These are not portraits, they are icons, deliberately abstract, supernatural by design. The Chronicles of Huayang, a regional history compiled in the Jin dynasty more than 1,000 years after the pits were filled, records that the first king of the land of Shu was named Kanchong and had protruding eyes. Many archaeologists read the bulging-eyed masks as images of that god king or his line, not as a record of anyone's anatomy. Stylized ritual sculpture is not a photograph of a face. Read it as one, and you will find a lost race in it that was never there. What is a real and open question is where the metal and the mastery came from. The bronzes of Sanxingdui carry an unusual chemical signature. Much of their lead is what geochemists call highly radiogenic, an isotopic fingerprint that matches none of the lead and zinc deposits known in China. Over half of the Sanxingdui bronzes tested carry it. And what makes it a genuine mystery is that the same fingerprint turns up in bronzes of the same age far away on the Middle Yangtze, at Panlongcheng, at Xingan. In a 2018 paper in Scientific Reports, the metallurgists Ruiliang Liu, Jessica Rawson, and Mark Pollard set the southern bronzes against the northern ones, and found several distant Bronze Age centers drawing on the same peculiar metal at the same time. From a source their analysis could not pin to any known deposit. Somewhere there was a vein of ore, or a network of trade carrying it, that fed a swath of early China, and it has still not been located. That unsolved source feeds a larger and entirely legitimate debate, one that has nothing to do with anyone's ancestry. Whether bronze working in China arose wholly on its own, or was set going by contact across the Great Eurasian Steppe, the grassland corridor that linked east and west for thousands of years before the Silk Road. One camp holds that Chinese metallurgy is a wholly indigenous invention. Bronze casting, on this reading, was worked out on the Yellow River and owes nothing to the West. The counter-argument is chronological. Copper and bronze technologies appear earlier in the steppe and in Western Asia than in China, and the earliest Chinese metal turns up already knowing techniques that took centuries to develop elsewhere, which is hard to explain without some transmission along the corridor. The argument runs both ways and is not settled, but it is a question about technology and trade and the movement of skills, not about race. So it is worth being careful about what Sanxingdui actually is and what it is not. We do not know who its people were in any genetic sense. The human remains from the wet soil of the site have yielded little usable DNA, which is a problem of preservation, not of concealment. The masks tell us about belief, not bloodline. The strange lead tells us about trade, not migration from any particular land. Strip away the embellishments, and the mystery does not shrink. It sharpens to its hardest form. A city that mastered bronze beyond all its neighbors, drew its metal from a source no one can find, and left no name at all. Nor is the find finished. For more than 30 years, it was just the two pits of 1986. Then, between 2020 and 2022, the Sichuan Provincial Institute of Cultural Relics and Archaeology opened 6 more, numbered 3 to 8, and more than 17,000 new objects came up out of them. Another gold mask, more bronzes, and traces of silk, some of it found clinging beside the eye of a bronze mask. Each season, the civilization grows larger and stranger rather than clearer, and most of it is still down there. The 8 pits sit inside a walled city of some 3.6 square kilometers, of which only a small fraction has been dug. Somewhere in the rest may lie the writing that would finally name these people, or the mine that fed their furnaces. Until it is found, the masks will go on staring out of their glass cases, eyes on stalks, at a world that has forgotten everything about them, including what they were so afraid of forgetting that they cast it, in tons of bronze, to last forever. If you want to support deeper research and found this journey as fascinating as we did, subscribe to Ancient Epochs for more.